In Millbrook, California, a 95-year-old D-Day veteran was about to face his most unexpected battle since Normandy. What started as his daily memorial visit took a shocking turn when angry teenagers, led by a grieving military son, attacked him. Tom Smith wasn't your typical elderly resident. For 7 decades, he had carried the weight of surviving Omaha Beach, known for his quiet dignity and crushing survivors' guilt. When Tyler Brooks shoved him to the ground, Tom had no idea this assault would trigger an extraordinary transformation. His choice of mercy over revenge would lead to the most powerful mentorship program in military history, forever changing Millbrook. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled off the Pacific in grey waves, settling over Millbrook like a shroud. Tom Smith moved through it with the careful precision of a man who had learned long ago that steady movement was the only way to navigate uncertainty. His weathered hands gripped the worn canvas bag that held his daily offerings, a small brush, a bottle of water, and a cloth that had seen 10,000 mornings just like this one. The Millbrook Veterans Memorial stood at the town's heart, where Coastal Highway met Main Street. Carved from black granite shipped down from Vermont, it bore the names of local boys who never came home from wars both distant and recent. Tom approached it as he had every morning for the past 5 years, since Margaret's funeral, when the silence of his apartment had become too heavy to bear. Tommy Kellerman's name was etched in the 4th row from the bottom, his letters worn smooth by Tom's daily ministrations. Tom knelt carefully, his 95-year-old joints protesting with familiar aches. The cloth emerged from his bag, dampened with water that caught the pale morning light. "Morning, Tommy," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant crash of waves. "Beautiful day coming, looks like." The ritual never varied. Clean the name, tell Tommy about the weather, share whatever fragment of news seemed worth mentioning. Some mornings, when the arthritis wasn't too bad, Tom would sit on the memorial's stone bench and tell longer stories. About Margaret's garden before she passed, about the neighbor's cat that had taken to sleeping on his fire escape, about anything, except the one story that mattered most. The morning of June the 6th, 1944, when Tommy Kellerman had thrown himself across 3 wounded soldiers as German machine gun fire raked Omaha Beach. When Tom had watched his best friend die in the surf while he crawled to safety behind a blown-out tank obstacle. When 20-year-old Tommy's dreams of becoming a teacher died with him in the Norman sand. "Excuse me, Mr. Smith." Tom looked up to find Maria Santos standing nearby, her bakery apron already dusted with flour, though her shop wouldn't open for another hour. She held a paper cup of coffee, steam rising from the small opening in the plastic lid. "Thought you might want something warm," she said, her voice carrying the careful tone people used around him, respectful but distant, as if he were made of something fragile and precious. "That's kind of you, Maria." Tom accepted the coffee, with both hands, noting how she avoided looking directly at the memorial wall. "Business picking up any?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, you know, tourist season's coming. Things will turn around." But Tom could see the weight in her shoulders, the way her eyes lingered on the "for sale" sign that had appeared in the window of Peterson's Hardware last week. Millbrook was bleeding slowly, its young people drifting away to cities with actual jobs, leaving behind empty storefronts and aging residents, clinging to memories of better times. "Your grandson still thinking about college?" Tom asked. "Berkeley accepted him," Maria said, pride and worry warring in her voice. "Full scholarship. He's a good boy." "He is," Tom agreed. "You did right by him." Across the street, movement caught his eye. A cluster of teenagers had gathered outside the closed pharmacy, their voices carrying the aggressive energy of young people with nowhere to go and nothing to do. Tom recognized Tyler Brooks immediately, tall for 17, with his father's broad shoulders and his mother's sharp cheekbones. The boy's army surplus jacket hung open despite the morning chill, revealing a T-shirt with some band logo Tom didn't recognize. With Tyler stood Marcus Thompson, thick-set and loud, his laughter always a beat too aggressive. Sarah Chen lingered at the group's edge, her designer backpack suggesting her family's restaurant was doing better than most local businesses. Two other kids Tom didn't know completed the circle, all of them watching the memorial with expressions that ranged from boredom to barely concealed hostility. "Look at him," Tyler's voice carried clearly across the empty street. "Same thing every damn day, like playing with that wall's gonna bring any of them back." Marcus snorted. "My grandma says he talks to dead people, says he's been losing it since his wife croaked." "Maybe we should check on him," Sarah said quietly. "Make sure he's okay." "Oh, he's fine," Tyler replied, his tone sharp with contempt. "Living off his war hero pension, while the rest of us deal with real problems. Must be nice, having everyone kiss your ass because you got lucky 70 years ago." Tom's hand tightened on the coffee cup. Maria had heard it too, her face flushing with embarrassment and anger. She started to turn toward the teenagers, but Tom caught her wrist gently. "Leave it," he said quietly. "Mr. Smith, they have no right. They're just kids." Tom's voice carried a weight that stopped her protest. "They don't understand what they're saying." But that wasn't entirely true. Tyler Brooks understood more than most people realized. Tom had seen the boy's file when Maggie Sullivan, Tyler's mother, had brought it to Dr. Hendrick's office, hoping the community center might have resources to help. Tom volunteered there sometimes, organizing donated clothing, and he glimpsed enough to know the story. Staff Sergeant David Brooks, killed by an IED outside Kandahar when Tyler was 12. A mother working 3 jobs to keep food on the table. A bright kid channeling his pain into anger because anger was easier than grief. Tom understood anger. He'd carried enough of it to know how it could poison everything good if you let it. "I should get going," Maria said, glancing nervously at the teenagers. "The morning rush—" "Of course." Tom stood slowly, his joints protesting the movement. "Thank you for the coffee." She hurried away, crossing to the opposite side of the E Street to avoid Tyler's group. Tom watched her go, then turned back to Tommy's name on the wall. He ran his fingers across the carved letters one more time. "They're not wrong, you know," he whispered to the stone. "It doesn't bring you back." The teenager's laughter followed him as he walked toward home, his small apartment 6 blocks away in a complex built for seniors. The building's beige walls and narrow hallways smelled of industrial disinfectant and old coffee. His unit, 4B, contained 30 years of married life compressed into 600 square feet. Margaret's reading chair still sat by the window, her bookmark still marking page 247 of a romance novel she'd never finished. Tom set the empty coffee cup on his kitchen counter and stood looking out at the morning. Millbrook stretched below him, its weathered buildings and empty lots telling the story of a town that had seen better days. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing patches of blue sky that promised warmth later. In a few hours, he'd walk to the community center for his volunteer shift. This afternoon, he'd grocery shop at the Safeway, exchanging polite nods with other customers who saw him as either a harmless relic or a reminder of sacrifices they couldn't quite comprehend. Tonight, he'd eat dinner alone while watching the news, learning about wars in places Tommy would never see, fought by young people who might understand Tyler Brooks better than they understood him. But tomorrow morning, he'd return to the memorial. He'd clean Tommy's name and sit with the weight of surviving when better men had died. He'd remember his friends' laugh, his dreams of teaching children, his certainty that the world could be made better if good people were willing to fight for it. And maybe Tyler Brooks would be watching again, building his resentment like kindling for a fire that would eventually burn them all. Tom closed his eyes and tried not to think about how much the boy reminded him of himself at that age. Angry, lost, and looking for someone to blame for the unfairness of a world that took fathers away before their sons were ready to let them go. The morning sun had burned through the fog by the time Tom made his second trip to the memorial. He'd forgotten his reading glasses at home and needed them for his volunteer shift at the community center. The walk back gave him another chance to visit Tommy's name, though he told himself that wasn't the real reason for the detour. Tyler Brooks and his group were still there. They'd moved closer to the memorial now, no longer content to observe. From across the street, Marcus Thompson sat on the stone bench where Tom usually rested, his boots propped up on the memorial's base. Sarah Chen stood apart from the others, her arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable with the proximity to the sacred space. Two other kids Tom didn't recognize flanked Tyler, a thin girl with purple hair and a boy whose oversized hoodie couldn't hide his nervous energy. "Here he comes again," Tyler announced as Tom approached. His voice carried a different edge now, sharper than the casual cruelty from earlier. "Right on schedule." Tom kept walking, his canvas bag in hand, eyes fixed on Tommy's name. He could feel the tension radiating from the group like heat from asphalt. Something had changed in the 3 hours since his morning visit. The casual mockery had hardened into something more dangerous. "Excuse me," Tom said quietly as he approached the memorial. Marcus was blocking access to the section where Tommy's name was carved. "Excuse you what?" Marcus replied, not moving, his feet. "This is a public space, old man. We got just as much right to be here as you do." "Of course you do." Tom's voice remained steady, though he could feel his heart beginning to race with the familiar flutter that came when memories of combat tried to surface. "I just need to—" "What, talk to your dead friends again?" Tyler stepped closer, and Tom could see the pain behind the boy's anger, raw and unprocessed, the kind of hurt that made people lash out at anything that reminded them of their own wounds. "You think they can hear you? You think any of this matters?" Tom met Tyler's gaze directly. In the boy's dark eyes he saw echoes of his own younger self, the fury that had burned in him after Tommy died, the desperate need to blame someone, anyone, for the randomness of loss. "I think," Tom said carefully, "that remembering matters. Honoring sacrifice matters." "Sacrifice?" Tyler's laugh was harsh. "You want to talk about sacrifice? My mom's working 3 jobs because my dad got blown up in some desert halfway around the world. Where's his name on this wall? Where's his fucking parade?" "Tyler," Sarah said quietly, "maybe we should—" "No!" Tyler cut her off, his voice rising. "I'm tired of watching this old man get treated like some kind of hero while people like my dad get forgotten. What makes World War II so special? What makes him so special?" Tom understood now. The anger wasn't really about him or the memorial. It was about a 12-year-old boy who'd watched his father's flag-draped coffin disappear into the ground, who'd seen his mother cry herself to sleep for months afterward, who'd grown up believing that military service was just another way to abandon the people who needed you most. "Your father was a hero too," Tom said gently. "Staff Sergeant David Brooks, Kandahar Province, 2019. He saved 4 members of his squad before—" "Don't." Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper, but the fury in it was palpable. "Don't you dare talk about my father." "I'm not trying to—" "Shut up!" Tyler shoved Tom hard, both hands against the old man's chest. Tom stumbled backward, his canvas bag falling to the ground, his reading glasses skittering across the pavement. "Tyler, stop!" Sarah lunged forward, grabbing Tyler's arm, but he shook her off. "All of you just watching him like he's some kind of saint," Tyler continued, his control completely gone now. "He's just an old man who got lucky, who lived when better people died." The words hit Tom like physical blows because they were true. He had lived when better people died. He'd spent 70 years wondering why Tommy Kellerman, who would have been a great teacher, who would have married his girl back home and raised good children, had to die while Tom Smith, who'd never done anything particularly meaningful with his survival, got to grow old. "You're right," Tom said quietly, and the unexpected admission seemed to catch Tyler off guard. "I did get lucky. I lived when better men died." For a moment, the admission seemed to diffuse some of Tyler's rage. But then his face hardened again, as if Tom's honesty was somehow another insult. "So why do you get to be the hero? Why does everyone treat you like you matter when—" Tyler shoved Tom again, harder this time. Tom's foot caught on the memorial stone border, and he fell backward, his head striking the granite wall with a sickening crack. Blood immediately began to seep from a gash above his left ear. "Oh, God!" Sarah gasped, rushing to Tom's side. "Tyler, what did you do?" Marcus had jumped up from the bench, his face pale. The other two teenagers backed away, suddenly realizing the situation had spiraled far beyond teenage rebellion into something serious and criminal. Tyler stood frozen, staring at the blood on Tom's forehead, his anger evaporating into horror at what he'd done. "I didn't mean," he started, but his words were cut off by the sound of running footsteps. 3 blocks away, Master Sergeant Eleanor Vasquez had been leading her training battalion through morning drills in Millbrook's small municipal park. The Marines were young, most of them fresh from basic training, and Elena used these community-based exercises to teach them about military bearing in civilian environments. When the shouts reached them across the quiet morning air, Elena's combat instincts kicked in immediately. "Rodriguez, Williams, with me. Rest of you, maintain formation and await orders." Eleanor reached the memorial at a full sprint, taking in the scene in seconds. An elderly man bleeding on the ground, teenagers scattered around him, the tang of violence still hanging in the air. Her training took over, assessing threats and determining priorities with the swift efficiency of someone who'd done this in actual combat zones. "Step back from the civilian," she ordered, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a Marine NCO. Tyler and his group found themselves automatically complying, their teenage bravado evaporating in the face of genuine military presence. "Sir, can you hear me?" Elena knelt beside Tom, pulling a first aid kit from her utility belt. "I'm Master Sergeant Vasquez, United States Marine Corps. Help is coming." Tom's eyes focused on her face, and despite the pain, despite the blood, he managed a slight smile. "Semper Fi, Sergeant." Elena's expression softened slightly. "Were you military, sir?" "Army, 2nd Infantry Division, Omaha Beach." Around them, more Marines arrived, forming a precise perimeter that left Tyler's group with nowhere to go. Elena looked up at Tyler, who stood frozen with blood on his hands and horror in his eyes. "Son," she said quietly, "I think you and I need to have a conversation." In the distance, sirens wailed as someone called for an ambulance and police. Tom closed his eyes and tried not to think about how quickly everything could change, how one moment of anger could transform a quiet morning into something that would haunt everyone involved for years to come. The sirens grew closer as Elena maintained pressure on Tom's head wound with a field dressing from her kit. Around them, her Marines held their positions with the quiet professionalism that made civilians suddenly aware they were in the presence of something beyond ordinary authority. Tyler Brooks stood motionless, his hands still stained with Tom's blood, watching the old man's chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. "Corporal Rodriguez," Elena called without taking her eyes off Tom, "I need you to take statements from these young people, separately. Start with the girl. She looks like she might actually tell the truth." James Rodriguez stepped forward, his youthful face serious with responsibility. At 22, he was barely older than the teenagers he was about to question. but his Marine bearing made him seem infinitely more mature. "Yes, Sergeant. Should I wait for local PD?" "Negative. We're witnesses to an assault on a veteran. I want our own record of what happened here." Sarah Chen had been crying silently since Tom hit the ground, her academic perfectionism crumbling in the face of real-world consequences. When Rodriguez approached her, she straightened slightly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "What's your name, miss?" Rodriguez asked gently. Sarah Chen. I tried to stop him. I tried to stop Tyler, but he wouldn't listen. The words tumbled out in a rush. He's been angry all morning, angrier than usual. Something about seeing Mr. Smith earlier, and then Marcus started making jokes about dead soldiers, and Tyler just snapped. 20 feet away, Marcus Thompson had gone very quiet. The bravado that usually radiated from him had evaporated completely. When Rodriguez turned to him next, Marcus's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I didn't know he was going to push him. I mean, Tyler talks big sometimes, but I didn't think." He trailed off, looking at Tom's still form. "Is he going to be okay?" Eleanor checked Tom's pulse again, steady but weak. "Sir, stay with me." "What's your name?" "Tom Smith," he managed, his voice clearer than his condition suggested it should be. "I'm fine, Sergeant, just a bump. With respect, sir, you're bleeding from the head, and you just took a fall at 95 years old. You're going to the hospital." The ambulance arrived with a squeal of brakes, followed immediately by 2 Millbrook police cars. Elena recognized Officer Janet Reeves, a competent woman in her 40s who'd been handling the town's limited crime for over a decade. Behind her came Officer Mike Chen, probably Sarah's uncle, based on the family resemblance and the way his face tightened when he saw the girl among the suspects. "Sergeant Vasquez," Officer Reeves nodded as she approached. "What's the situation?" "Assault on an elderly veteran, ma'am. Multiple witnesses. The perpetrator is cooperative." Elena gestured toward Tyler, who hadn't moved or spoken since the Marines arrived. "I've had my people take preliminary statements." The paramedics took over Tom's care with swift efficiency. Elena stepped back, her uniform crisp despite the morning's chaos, and turned her attention to Tyler. The boy was staring at his hands as if he couldn't understand how they'd betrayed him. "Son," Elena said quietly, "what's your name?" "Tyler Brooks." His voice was hollow, all the anger drained out of it. "Tyler, I need you to understand something. You just assaulted a United States veteran, a man who stormed the beaches of Normandy to defend the freedoms you take for granted every day." Elena's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. "Do you comprehend the magnitude of what you've done?" Tyler finally looked up, and Elena saw something she recognized, the look of a young person who'd just realized that actions have consequences, that the adult world has real stakes. It was the same expression she'd seen on recruits' faces during their first live fire exercise, when they understood that bullets were actually dangerous. "I didn't mean to hurt him," Tyler said. I was angry." "Angry about what?" Tyler's mouth opened and closed several times before he found words. "Everyone treats him like he's special, like what he did matters more than what my dad did. My dad died too, but nobody cares. Nobody remembers." Elena studied Tyler's face, seeing past the teenage defiance to the grief underneath. She'd mentored enough young Marines to recognize pain when it presented itself as anger. "Your father was military?" "Staff Sergeant David Brooks, Afghanistan 2019. Tyler's voice cracked slightly on the dates. Elena's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She'd lost Marines in Afghanistan. She knew the weight those dates carried. "How old were you when he died?" 12. Officer Reeves approached, her handcuffs ready. "Sergeant, if you're done with the suspect—" "Actually," Eleanor interrupted, "I'd like to suggest an alternative." Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Alternative to what?" The kid assaulted a senior citizen. There are witnesses. I understand that, but before you process him, I think there's someone you should talk to. The ambulance was preparing to leave, Tom secured on a stretcher but conscious and alert. Elena walked over to the paramedics. "Sir, before you go, the young man who pushed you. Would you like to press charges?" Tom turned his head to look at Tyler, who stood surrounded by police and Marines, his face a mask of shame and fear. For a long moment the old man studied the boy, seeing something the others had missed. "What's his name?" Tom asked. "Tyler Brooks. His father was Staff Sergeant David Brooks, Kandahar Province." Tom closed his eyes briefly. "I know about his father." "Sir?" Elena leaned closer. "I don't want to press charges," Tom said clearly, his voice carrying despite his injuries. "Not yet, anyway." Officer Reeves looked incredulous. "Mr. Smith, that boy put you in the hospital. We have multiple witnesses. And I'm telling you, I don't want him arrested. Not today." Tom struggled to sit up slightly, his eyes finding Tyler across the memorial plaza. "That boy is in pain. Arresting him won't fix what's broken in him." A commotion near the police cars announced the arrival of Maggie Sullivan, still wearing her nurse's scrubs from the night shift at Millbrook General. She'd clearly run from her car, her face flushed with exertion and panic. "Tyler!" She pushed through the crowd of Marines and police officers, reaching her son just as Officer Reeves was about to read him his rights. "What happened?" "Mrs. Chen called me at work and said—" She stopped, seeing the blood on Tyler's hands, the guilt written across his face. "Mom," Tyler said quietly, "I screwed up. I really screwed up." Maggie looked around, taking in the scene, the ambulance, the Marines, her son surrounded by authority figures. When her eyes found Tom on the stretcher, recognition dawned. "Oh, God, Tyler, what did you do?" Before Tyler could answer, another voice cut through the chaos. Dr. Patricia Hendricks approached from the direction of the community center, her professional demeanor intact, despite the obvious urgency of her pace. She'd built a career managing crises involving at-risk youth, and she could read this situation like a familiar map. "Officer Reeves," she said calmly, "before you proceed, I think we should explore some alternatives. I believe I know both of these families." Elena watched the dynamics shift as the community's support systems began to activate. This was what she'd hoped for, not just punishment, but the possibility of something more constructive. "Dr. Hendricks," she said, "I think we need to talk." As Tom's ambulance pulled away, sirens fading into the morning air, Elena looked at Tyler Brooks and saw not just a criminal, but a young man whose pain had finally found an outlet in violence. She thought about her own brother, lost in a training accident, and the months of anger that had followed. She thought about the power of second chances, properly administered. "Tyler," she said quietly, "how would you feel about earning your way back to honor instead of just being punished for losing it?" The boy looked up at her with confusion and the faintest flicker of hope. Around them, the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the fog and revealing a day full of unexpected possibilities. 1 week later, the Millbrook Community Center's main meeting room felt smaller than its actual dimensions suggested. 5 folding chairs arranged in a rough circle, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and the lingering smell of coffee from the senior citizens' breakfast program earlier that morning. Tom Smith sat carefully in one of the chairs, a white bandage still visible above his left ear, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied a folder Dr. Hendricks had given him. Tyler Brooks occupied the chair farthest from Tom, his court-mandated community service paperwork crumpled in his jacket pocket. He'd been staring at the floor for the past 10 minutes, occasionally glancing up to check the clock on the wall. Beside him, Marcus Thompson fidgeted with a pen, clicking it nervously while stealing glances at Master Sergeant Vasquez, who sat with the rigid posture of someone who could wait all day if necessary. Sarah Chen had positioned herself between the two groups, her notebook open, ready to take notes on whatever was about to happen. She'd researched restorative justice programs online, reading about conflict resolution and community healing, until her eyes burned. Knowledge was her way of managing anxiety, and this situation made her more anxious than any test she'd ever taken. Dr. Hendricks stood at the front of the room, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who'd facilitated dozens of these sessions. Before we begin, I want everyone to understand what we're attempting here. This isn't traditional punishment, and it's not therapy. It's an opportunity for accountability, understanding, and potentially healing. Tyler shifted in his chair. "And if we don't want to be here, then you're free to leave," Dr. Hendricks replied smoothly. "And Officer Reeves will be happy to discuss the assault charges that are currently being held in abeyance." "Abeyance," Marcus muttered. "What's that mean?" "It means," Elena said without looking up from her own folder, "that Mr. Smith's generosity is the only thing standing between Tyler and a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life." Tom spoke for the first time since they'd gathered. "That's not why I'm here." His voice was quieter than usual but steady. "I'm here because I think we have something to learn from each other." Tyler's head snapped up. "Learn what? How to be a good soldier, how to die for your country and get a fancy memorial." "Tyler," Sarah said quietly, "maybe you should listen." Listen to what? More hero worship?" Tyler's voice rose slightly. "My mom made me read about him online. Tom Smith, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, survivor of D-Day. Everyone knows the story. Everyone knows how special he is." Tom removed his glasses and cleaned them carefully, a gesture that seemed to calm the room somehow. "Tyler, what do you know about June 6th, 1944? "That you invaded France and saved the world," Tyler replied, with bitter sarcasm. "I was terrified," Tom said simply. "Most terrified I've ever been in my life. I threw up twice on the transport ship before we hit the beach, when the ramp dropped and I saw what we were running into." He paused, his eyes focusing on something beyond the room's walls. "I wanted to hide at the bottom of that boat and wait for someone else to be brave." Marcus stopped clicking his pen. Even Tyler seemed caught off guard by the admission. "But I ran anyway," Tom continued. "Not because I was brave, but because my friend Tommy was running, and I couldn't let him face it alone. Everything that happened after that, the medal, the recognition, it all came from one moment of not wanting to be left behind." Elena leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Smith, you're being modest. Your citation mentions—" "My citation mentions results," Tom interrupted gently. "It doesn't mention how scared I was, or how many mistakes I made, or how many nights I've spent wondering why I lived when better men died." He looked directly at Tyler. "It doesn't mention that I spent 20 years drinking too much because I couldn't figure out why I deserved to come home when Tommy didn't." The room fell silent, except for the fluorescent light's persistent hum. Sarah was writing furiously in her notebook, but Tyler had gone very still. "That's the thing about being young," Tom said. "You think the adults around you have everything figured out, that we became wise somehow, that our pain means something yours doesn't." He shook his head. "Pain is just pain, Tyler. Mine isn't more noble than yours." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Hendricks chose her moment carefully. "Tom, would you be willing to share what you told me yesterday about why you agreed to this program?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of his folder. "Tommy Kellerman, my friend who died on the beach. He wanted to be a teacher, used to talk about it all the time during training. Said he figured the best way to honor the guys who didn't make it was to help the ones who came after understand what they'd fought for. He looked around the circle, his gaze settling on each teenager in turn. I never became a teacher. Went into construction instead, built houses for 40 years. Good work, honest work, but not what Tommy would have done. His voice grew quieter. Maybe this is my chance to finally do what he would have wanted. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. So you want to teach us about the war? I want to teach you about honor, Tom replied. Real honor, not the kind they put on recruiting posters. The kind that means taking responsibility for your actions, standing up for people who can't protect themselves, and figuring out how to channel your pain into something useful instead of something destructive. Tyler's jaw was clenched tight, but Sarah could see something working behind his eyes, the same look he got when wrestling with a difficult concept in AP history. Elena opened her own folder. For this program to work, everyone needs to contribute. Mr. Smith has agreed to share his experiences and mentor you three. In return, you'll each complete a research project on a significant military conflict, present your findings to the group, and participate in community service related to veteran support. And if we do all that, Tyler asked, then the charges disappear, and you'll have learned something valuable about service, sacrifice, and responsibility, Dr. Hendricks replied. If you don't, she shrugged. We'll be back to discussing legal consequences. Sarah raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Smith, what would you want us to research? Tom considered the question carefully. Something that challenges what you think you know. Something that makes you ask questions instead of just accepting easy answers. He paused. Tyler, you might find it interesting to learn about what happened to the children of soldiers who died in World War II, how they dealt with loss, how they honored their fathers' memories. Tyler's expression darkened. You think I don't know how to honor my father? I think, Tom said gently, that you're angry at him for leaving you, and you're taking that anger out on everyone who reminds you that he made a choice to serve, including me. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler's hands clenched into fists, but instead of lashing out, he seemed to fold in on himself slightly. What do you know about it? He asked quietly. More than you might think, Tom replied. My father died in the First War, France, 1918. I was 8 years old when the telegram came. Spent years being angry at everyone who called him a hero, while my mother worked herself to death, trying to raise 3 kids alone. Tyler looked up sharply, surprise replacing some of the anger in his expression. The difference, Tom continued, is that I didn't have anyone to teach me how to turn that anger into something useful. I had to figure it out on my own, and it took me decades. Maybe we can do better for you. Elena closed her folder with a decisive snap. Next meeting is in 3 days. Same time, same place. I expect everyone to come prepared with a preliminary research topic. She stood, her bearing military straight. This is your opportunity to prove that good people can come back from bad choices. Don't waste it. As the group began to disperse, Tom remained seated, his eyes on Tyler, who hadn't moved from his chair. Tyler, Tom said quietly, for what it's worth, your father was a good soldier. I looked up his record. He saved 4 men before that IED went off. That takes courage. Tyler's voice was barely audible. Then why does it feel like he abandoned us? Ordail, Tom's expression softened with understanding. Because loving someone means wanting them to choose you over everything else, even when you know that's not always the right choice. For the first time since the assault, Tyler met Tom's eyes, directly. In that moment something shifted. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but the possibility that understanding might be worth the discomfort of honestly examining their shared pain. 3 days later, the same circle of chairs awaited them, But the atmosphere in the community center had changed. Tom arrived early, carrying a worn photo album and a thermos of coffee that filled the room with the rich scent of something stronger than the usual institutional brew. He'd spent the previous evening organizing materials he hadn't looked at in years, discharge papers, unit photographs, and letters from Tommy's mother that had arrived months after the war ended. Tyler entered exactly on time, neither early nor late, carrying a laptop bag and wearing the same defiant expression he'd worn to their first meeting. But Sarah noticed something different in his posture, less aggressive, more guarded, as if he were protecting something fragile rather than projecting strength. Marcus followed close behind, unusually quiet. He'd spent the last 3 days researching the Battle of the Bulge, and the stories he'd read had shaken something loose in his understanding of what war actually meant. Gone was his usual nervous energy, replaced by a thoughtful seriousness that made him seem older. Sarah settled into her usual position between the two factions, her own research folder thick with printouts about the Pacific Theater. She'd started with academic curiosity, but found herself drawn deeper into personal accounts from soldiers who'd fought in conditions that made her grandfather's stories about fleeing Vietnam seem even more harrowing. Elena arrived last, carrying herself with the same military bearing, but something softer in her expression. She'd spent 2 sleepless nights thinking about her brother Miguel, killed during a training exercise when a routine parachute jump went wrong. 23 years old, full of plans to use his GI benefits for medical school, gone in an instant because of the equipment malfunction and bad weather. Dr. Hendricks opened the session with the same professional calm as before. But Tom raised his hand before she could begin. "If it's all right," he said, "I'd like to start today. I promised to share a story, and I think it's time." The room settled into expectant silence. Tom opened his photo album to a black and white picture of 2 young men in uniform, their arms around each other's shoulders, grinning, despite the obvious exhaustion in their faces. "This is Tommy Kellerman and me, taken in England about a week before D-Day. We just finished our final training exercise, and we thought we were ready for anything." Tom's voice was steady, but his fingers trembled slightly as he traced the edge of the photograph. Tommy was from Ohio, small farming town. His parents had saved every penny to send him to teachers' college before the war started. He used to say that once we beat the Germans, he was going to teach history so that kids would understand why it had been worth fighting for. Tyler shifted in his chair, but his attention was fixed on the photograph. The morning of June 6th, we were in the landing craft, waiting for our turn to hit the beach. Tommy was terrified, we all were, but he kept talking about what he was going to do after the war, the classroom he'd have, the students he'd teach. He made it seem real, made it seem like we had something waiting for us on the other side of whatever we were about to face. Tom turned the page to another photograph, this one showing a broader group of soldiers. These were our squad mates, 19 men in this picture. By the end of that day, 12 of them were dead. Marcus stopped fidgeting completely. Sarah's pen had frozen over her notebook. When the ramp dropped and we ran toward the beach, the machine gun fire was. It was like nothing you can imagine. Men were falling everywhere. Tommy and I got separated in the chaos, but I could see him ahead of me, still moving, still fighting. Tom's voice grew quieter. There were 3 soldiers pinned down behind a blown-out tank obstacle, wounded, unable to move. The Germans had them in a crossfire, picking them off one by one. Tom closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, Tyler could see tears threatening to fall. Tommy saw them too. He could have kept moving, could have made it to cover like the rest of us, but he didn't. He ran straight into that crossfire, threw himself across those wounded soldiers, and started dragging them to safety one by one. The machine gun cut him down on his 3rd trip back. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to have stopped humming. I watched my best friend die, saving people he'd never met, and all I could think was that it should have been me. That Tommy had something important to offer the world, those kids he wanted to teach, the difference he was going to make, and I was just nobody special. Tyler's voice was barely audible when he spoke. But you survived. I survived, Tom confirmed. Got the Bronze Star for actions I barely remember taking after Tommy died. Came home, married Margaret, built houses, raised no children, and spent 70 years wondering what I was supposed to do with the life Tommy died protecting. Elena leaned forward. Mr. Smith, that's not... It is true, Tom interrupted gently. And it's taken me this long to understand that survivor's guilt isn't something you get over. It's something you carry, something you honor, by figuring out how to make your survival mean something. He looked directly at Tyler. Your turn. You researched Afghanistan. What did you learn? Tyler opened his laptop with hands that weren't quite steady. I looked up my dad's unit, the men he served with, the mission he died on. He paused, staring at his screen. I never read the actual reports before. Mom always said it would be too hard. And was it? Tom asked. Yeah, but... Tyler's voice cracked slightly. There was this interview with one of the soldiers my dad saved, guy named Martinez. He said my dad didn't hesitate when the IED went off, just ran straight into the killing zone to pull people out, even though he could have stayed in cover. Tyler's hands were shaking now. Martinez said my dad saved his life and that he got to go home to his daughter because of what my dad did. His daughter was born 3 months after my dad died. She's named David. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Marcus was staring at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. I've been angry at him, Tyler continued, his voice breaking. Angry that he chose strangers over us, that he left Mom to work 3 jobs, that he left me to figure everything out alone. But reading about what he did... He stopped, unable to continue. It's okay to be angry, Tom said gently. I was angry at Tommy for years. Angry that he was brave when I wanted him to be scared and alive. How do you stop being angry? Tyler asked. You don't stop, Elena said quietly, speaking for the first time since the session began. You learn to carry it differently. She looked around the circle. I lost my brother Miguel in a training accident, 23 years old, 6 months before he was supposed to get out and start medical school. I was angry at the Marine Corps, angry at the weather, angry at him for joining in the first place. She took a breath. But then I realized that staying angry wasn't honoring his memory. It was dishonoring it. Miguel believed in service, believed in helping others. So I had a choice. Let the anger destroy me, or figure out how to serve the way he would have wanted me to. Marcus finally looked up. I researched the Battle of the Bulge. Read about soldiers who were kids, basically. 17, 18 years old, fighting in conditions that would kill most people. And I kept thinking. He trailed off. What did you think? Dr. Hendricks prompted gently. I kept thinking that they were brave in a way I don't know if I could be. And that maybe. Maybe I've been wasting my time trying to be tough when I should be trying to be useful. Sarah spoke for the first time. I read about the Pacific Theater, about soldiers who fought for months in jungles, never knowing if they'd see home again. And I thought about my grandfather, who was just a kid when he had to flee Vietnam. How he never talked about it, but how everything he did afterward was about building something safe for our family. She looked at Tom. I think I understand why you visit the memorial every day. You're not just remembering Tommy. You're trying to figure out how to live up to what he died for. Tom nodded slowly. That's exactly right. And maybe that's what we're all trying to figure out, how to live up to the people who didn't get the chance to keep trying. Tyler closed his laptop and looked around the circle. So what do we do? With that, how do we honor them without pretending we're as good as they were? We start by admitting we're not, Tom replied, and then we work on becoming worthy of their sacrifice. Not perfect, just worthy. Elena stood up. Next session, we're taking a field trip. I want all of you to meet at the memorial, same time as today. We're going to learn about the names on that wall, and then we're going to figure out how to take care of the people whose stories are written there. As they prepared to leave, Tyler lingered behind. Mr. Smith, Tommy's mother, did she ever forgive you for coming home when he didn't? Tom smiled sadly. She told me once that I was Tommy's gift to the world, that he died making sure someone would be left to remember what he stood for. I never believed her, but maybe it's time I tried. Tyler nodded, understanding something he couldn't yet put into words. For the first time since his father's death, his anger felt like something he might be able to shape into purpose rather than destruction. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Millbrook Veterans Memorial as the group assembled for their field trip. Tom had arrived first, as always, but this time he wasn't alone with his memories. Tyler stood beside him, both of them looking at the black granite wall in a way that seemed different from just a week ago, less like a barrier between them, and more like common ground they were learning to share. Elena appeared precisely on time, followed by Marcus and Sarah, who had walked from the community center together. Doctor. Hendricks brought up the rear, carrying a folding chair for Tom and a thermos of coffee that had become their unofficial session ritual. Before we begin, Tom said, his voice carrying more strength than it had in their previous meetings, I want to show you something I've never shown anyone except Margaret. He reached into his canvas bag and withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and worn soft at the creases. This is a letter Tommy wrote to his parents the night before D-Day. He gave it to me to mail if he didn't make it home. Tyler moved closer instinctively, and Tom noticed that the aggressive tension that had defined the boy's posture was slowly being replaced by something that looked like genuine interest. He wrote about teaching, Tom continued, unfolding the letter carefully, about how he wanted to help kids understand that freedom isn't free, but that it's worth whatever price good people are willing to pay for it. He said. Tom's voice caught slightly. He said he hoped that if he didn't make it, someone else would carry on that mission. Sarah stepped forward. Mr. Smith, would you read it to us? Tom looked around the circle, seeing something in their faces that hadn't been there before, not just tolerance or court-mandated compliance, but actual curiosity about the man whose memory had started their journey together. Dear Mom and Dad, Tom began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. If Tom is reading this to you, then I didn't make it home from whatever we're about to face. I want you to know that I'm not afraid, not really. Scared, yes, but not afraid. There's a difference. Marcus found himself leaning in, drawn by the simple honesty in words written by someone not much older than he was. I keep thinking about that classroom I'm going to have someday, about the kids I'll teach, about why this war mattered. And I realize that even if I don't get to be that teacher, maybe the story of what we're doing here will teach them anyway. Maybe someone else will. Tell them about the boys who came to France to make sure they could grow up free. Tyler's jaw was clenched, but not with anger this time. Tom could see the boy was fighting tears. Tell them we weren't heroes. We were just regular kids who believed that some things are worth fighting for. Tell them that love for the people back home can make regular people do extraordinary things. And tell them that the best way to honor what we did is to build something beautiful with the peace we're trying to give them. Tom refolded the letter carefully, his hands trembling slightly. I mailed this letter after the war ended. His mother wrote back and said she wanted me to keep it, to remember what Tommy believed in. Elena stepped toward the memorial wall, running her fingers along the engraved names. 43 names from Millbrook on this wall. 3 wars, spanning 60 years, each one representing someone's son, someone's father, someone's brother. She stopped at a name near the bottom. David Martinez, Vietnam, 1968, age 19. He was going to be a mechanic, had a job lined up at his uncle's garage when he got home. She moved to another name. Robert Chen, Korean War, 1951, age 22. Sarah, was he related to you? Sarah nodded, surprised. My great-uncle, my grandmother's brother. I never knew he was on here. James Sullivan, Elena continued, and Tyler's head snapped up. World War II, Pacific Theatre. Maggie's father-in-law. Tyler, your grandfather by marriage. Tyler stared at the name he'd walked past hundreds of times without noticing. I didn't know. Mom never said. And here, Elena's finger found another name, Staff Sergeant David Brooks. Tyler's breath caught. My dad's name isn't. That's not my dad. Tom spoke gently. That's your grandfather, Tyler. Your father's father, Korean War, 1952. Your father was named after him. Tyler stood frozen, staring at his grandfather's name carved in granite. But my dad never mentioned. He never said his father was. Sometimes the pain goes too deep to talk about, Tom said quietly. Sometimes fathers and sons carry the same wounds without knowing how to share them. Marcus had been silent, but now he approached a name near the middle of the wall. Elena, can you tell me about this one? Michael Thompson, Vietnam, 1969. Elena consulted a small notebook she'd brought. Your uncle, Marcus, your father's younger brother. He was 18, just graduated high school. Volunteered for the infantry because he wanted to serve with the Marines but wasn't old enough yet. Marcus's grandmother had never talked about Michael, had only said that the family had lost someone in Vietnam and left it at that. Now Marcus understood why she sometimes looked sad when she watched war movies, why she always changed the channel. When the news showed military ceremonies, Sarah found herself studying the wall with new eyes, seeing not just names, but stories, connections that bound her community together in ways she'd never realized. Mr. Smith, how many of these people do you know about? Most of them, Tom replied. Margaret and I made it our business to learn their stories, to make sure someone remembered why they mattered. That's what the memorial is really for, not just to honor the dead, but to teach the living about the price of the life we have. Tyler's voice was quiet when he spoke. My dad used to say that military families carry the weight of history. I never understood what he meant. He meant, Eleanor said, that service runs in bloodlines, that understanding sacrifice, understanding duty gets passed down like DNA. Your father served because his father served. Your anger about his choice comes from the same place his choice came from. Love for family, love for country, and the knowledge that some things are worth risking. Everything to protect. Tom sat down on the memorial bench, suddenly looking his 95 years. Tyler, the day you pushed me, you said I got to be the hero while your father got forgotten. But look around you. Your father isn't forgotten. His service is part of a legacy that goes back generations in your family. Then why does it hurt so much? Tyler asked, his voice breaking. Because love hurts, Sarah said quietly, surprising everyone, including herself. When you love someone, you want them to choose you over everything else, even when you know that's not always possible. Elena nodded. Your father chose service because he loved you and your mother enough to risk everything to protect the world you'd grow up in, just like his father did, just like his grandfather did. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. So what do we do with that? How do we live up to it? Udain, Tom smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, it reached his eyes. We start by taking care of this place, by learning these stories and making sure they don't get forgotten, by figuring out how to serve something bigger than ourselves. He stood up slowly, pulling a small brush from his bag. Tyler, would you help me clean these names? All of them, not just Tommy's? Tyler took the brush without hesitation. What do I do? Start with your grandfather's name, Tom said. And when you're done with his, move to your great-grandfather's. Learn them by touch, make them part of you. As Tyler began to gently scrub the granite, removing weeks of accumulated grime and weather stains, Tom felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the guilt he'd carried for 70 years. Tommy's dream of teaching was finally coming. True, just not in the way either of them had imagined. Elena watched the old man and the teenager work side by side, and she thought about her brother Miguel, about the mentorship programs he'd planned to start when he got out of the Corps. Maybe this was how those programs were supposed to work, not through official channels and paperwork, but through the simple act of one generation helping the next understand what they were inheriting. Next week, she said, we're going to start planning a community memorial service, something bigger than what's ever been done here before, something that honors not just the dead, but the families who carry their memory forward. Tyler looked up from his grandfather's name, his hands dirty with granite dust, but his expression clearer than it had been in years. Can we invite my mom? I think she'd want to hear these stories too. Tom smiled. Son, I think that's exactly what Tommy would have wanted. 3 weeks into planning the community memorial service, the fragile bonds forged between Tom and the teenagers faced their first real test. The morning started like any other, with Tom arriving at the memorial to find Tyler already there, carefully cleaning his grandfather's name as had become their shared ritual. But something was different in the boy's posture, tense, alert, like an animal sensing approaching danger. What's wrong? Tom asked, setting down his canvas bag. Jake Morrison and his crew showed up at my house last night, Tyler said without looking up from the granite. My old friends. They heard about the memorial service, about me working with you. Tom felt a familiar weight settle in his stomach. He'd seen this before. Young people caught between their past and their future, forced to choose which version of themselves they wanted to become. What did they want? They think I've gone soft, think I'm letting you and the Marines brainwash me into being their poster boy for reformed delinquents. Tyler's voice carried a bitterness that hadn't been there in weeks. Jake said I was betraying everything we stood for. And what did you tell him? Tyler finally looked up, and Tom could see the uncertainty in his eyes. I told him to leave, but he said he'd be back. Said if I was going to embarrass myself by playing soldier with a bunch of has-beens, he'd make sure everyone knew what a joke I'd become. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Marcus arrived looking shaken, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by something closer to fear. Tyler, man, you need to know, Jake and his guys were at my grandma's place this morning. They told her about the program, said you were making fools of all of us. She's not happy. Tom studied Marcus's face, seeing the conflict there. The boy's grandmother had raised him, was the only family he had left. If she disapproved of the mentorship program, Marcus would be forced to choose between his loyalty to her and his growing commitment to the group. Sarah appeared from the direction of the community center, walking faster than usual. When she reached them, her face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. My parents got a call last night, she said without preamble. Someone told them the program was some kind of military recruitment scheme, that Elena was using you to manipulate us into enlisting. They want me to quit. Tom sat down heavily on the memorial bench, feeling the weight of 70 years pressing down on him. This was how it always happened. Just when something good started to take root, the forces of fear and misunderstanding conspired to tear it apart. "There's more," Tyler said quietly. "Jake's planning something for the memorial service. He won't say what, but he keeps talking about showing everyone the truth about heroes and honor. I think he's going to try to disrupt it." The irony wasn't lost on Tom. Just 3 weeks ago, Tyler had been the one planning to disrupt the memorial's peace. Now he was the one trying to protect it. Elena arrived with Dr. Hendricks and Corporal Rodriguez, all three of them carrying folders and looking official. Tom could tell from Elena's expression that she'd already heard about the community resistance. "I've been fielding calls since 6 this morning," Dr. Hendricks said without preamble. "Parents concerned about military indoctrination, community members questioning whether this program is appropriate, and Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell wants a full report on our activities before he'll authorize continued Marine participation." Elena's jaw was set in the way that told Tom she was fighting her own battle with institutional pressure. "There are questions about proper protocols, about civilian-military cooperation guidelines. Some of my fellow NCOs think I've overstepped my authority." "So we're done?" Marcus asked, his voice small. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Tom replied firmly. "But we're going to face some tests before this is over." As if summoned. By his words, a police car pulled up to the memorial. Officer Reeves got out, her expression apologetic but determined. Behind her came Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, his presence immediate and commanding in the way that made even Tom straighten his posture instinctively. "Sergeant Vasquez." Mitchell's voice carried the crisp authority of someone used to having. His words obeyed without question. "I need to speak with you about this program. There have been concerns raised about appropriate boundaries and protocols." Elena stood at attention. "Sir, I'm prepared to provide a full briefing on our activities and objectives." "That won't be necessary right now," Mitchell replied, his eyes taking in the group assembled around the memorial. "What I need to understand is whether this program is producing results or simply creating more problems for everyone involved." Tyler stepped forward, and Tom felt a surge of pride at the boy's courage. "Sir, if I may—" "You may not," Mitchell cut him off, but not unkindly. "This is a military matter, son." Tom stood up slowly, his 95-year-old frame straightening, with dignity that commanded attention. "With respect, Colonel, this isn't just a military matter. This is about community healing, about helping young people understand the value of service and sacrifice, about honoring the memory of fallen soldiers, by teaching the next generation what they died for." Mitchell studied Tom for a long moment. "You're Thomas Smith, 2nd Infantry Division, Bronze Star recipient." "Yes, sir. I've read your file. Impressive service record." Mitchell's tone softened slightly. "But impressive service records don't automatically qualify someone to mentor troubled youth. There are procedures, protocols, oversight requirements." "You're right," Tom acknowledged. "But sometimes the most important work happens outside official channels. Sometimes healing can't wait for paperwork to be processed." Sarah spoke up, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "Colonel, my parents are worried that you're trying to recruit us. But Tyler's not becoming a soldier. He's becoming a better person. There's a difference." Marcus nodded vigorously. "And I am thinking about enlisting, but not because anyone pressured me, because I learned what service really means, because I want to be part of something that matters." Tyler took a deep breath. "So 3 weeks ago I assaulted Mr. Smith because I was angry about my father's death, angry about everything military service had cost my family. Now I understand that my father died for something important, and that the best way to honor his memory is to figure out how to serve something bigger than myself." Mitchell looked around the group, his expression unreadable. And what happens when your former associates attempt to disrupt your memorial service? What happens when community pressure mounts against this program? Will your commitment survive real adversity? I guess we're about to find out, Tyler replied. At that moment, a group of motorcycles roared into the memorial plaza. Jake Morrison and 4 other young men dismounted, their aggressive posture and territorial behavior immediately raising the tension level. Tom recognized the dynamic instantly. This was a direct challenge to Tyler's transformation, a test of whether his commitment to change was stronger than his loyalty to his past. "Well, well," Jake called out, swaggering toward the group with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "Look at this touching scene. Tyler Brooks playing soldier with Grandpa and the Marines." Elena stepped forward, her military bearing a stark contrast to Jake's theatrical aggression. "This is a memorial site. Show some respect." Jake laughed. "Respect for what? For old men living in the past? For kids pretending they're something they're not?" He looked directly at Tyler. "Come on, man. This is embarrassing. You used to have some pride." Tyler looked at Jake, then at Tom, then at the names carved in the memorial wall. Tom could see the moment of decision approaching, could see Tyler weighing his old identity against the new one he'd been building. "I do have pride," Tyler said quietly, "just not in the same things I used to." Jake's expression hardened. "Then I guess we'll see what your new friends think when everyone in town learns the truth about their little hero worship club." Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell watched the confrontation with the analytical eye of someone who'd spent a career evaluating young people under pressure. In Tyler's steady gaze and squared shoulders, he saw something that couldn't be faked or programmed, genuine character being tested by fire. "Son," Mitchell said to Tyler, "are you prepared to defend what you've learned here? Are you prepared to stand up for the principles you claim to have embraced?" Tyler looked at his former leader, then at the man who'd become his mentor, and finally at the memorial wall where 3 generations of his family's names were carved in stone. "Yes, sir," he said, "I am." The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the coastal fog and revealing a day that would test everything they'd built together. Tom thought about Tommy Kellerman's letter, about building something beautiful with the peace that soldiers had died to protect. The building was about to begin in earnest. The day of the community memorial service dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze off the Pacific that carried the salt tang of possibility. Tom had been awake since 4 in the morning, not from anxiety, but from anticipation, the kind he hadn't felt since Margaret was alive, and they'd planned their anniversary celebrations together. By 8 o'clock, the Millbrook Veterans Memorial had been transformed. Tyler and Marcus had spent the previous evening stringing lights between the memorial and the surrounding trees, while Sarah had coordinated with local businesses to provide chairs and a small sound system. Dr. Hendricks had managed the logistics with military precision, and Elena had ensured that every detail met the standards worthy of honoring fallen soldiers. Tom stood at the memorial wall, wearing his dress uniform for the first time in 15 years. The bronze star and purple heart on his chest caught the morning light, but more importantly, his posture carried a dignity that hadn't been there a month ago. Beside him, Tyler wore his father's dress blues, altered to fit his younger frame, but carrying the weight of 3 generations of service. "You ready for this?" Tyler asked, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. "Are any of us ever ready for the important moments?" Tom replied. "Tommy used to say that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared." The first attendees began arriving at 9, an hour before the official start time. Mrs. Santos from the bakery came early, bringing fresh coffee and pastries for the volunteers. Officer Reeves arrived in her dress uniform, followed by several other local law enforcement officers who'd known David Brooks. Dr. Hendricks positioned herself near the entrance, greeting each arrival with the practiced warmth of someone who understood that healing required witnessing. At 9:30, Maggie Sullivan appeared, walking slowly toward the memorial with tears already streaming down her face. She wore a simple black dress and carried a folded flag, the one that had covered her husband's coffin 7 years ago. When she saw Tyler in his father's uniform, she stopped breathing for a moment. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You look just like him." Tyler embraced his mother, and Tom watched the interaction with deep satisfaction. The angry, destructive young man who'd pushed him to the ground was gone, replaced by someone who understood that honoring the dead meant living with purpose. Elena appeared in her dress blues, accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and a dozen Marines in full ceremony regalia. Mitchell approached Tom with the measured pace of someone who'd made a significant decision. "Mr. Smith," he said formally, "I want you to know that after observing this program and its results, I'm recommending its adoption as a model for community military cooperation nationwide." Tom felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "Thank you, Colonel. That means more than you know." "The credit belongs to you and these young people," Mitchell replied. "You've shown that healing doesn't require formal programs or official sanction. It requires courage, commitment, and the willingness to build bridges across generational divides." As the hour approached 10, the crowd had swelled to nearly 200 people, the largest gathering in the memorial's history. Tom could see community members who'd been skeptical of the program, parents who'd worried about military indoctrination, and teenagers who'd come to support their friends. And at the back of the crowd, partially concealed behind a food truck, Jake Morrison and his crew watched with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely contained hostility. Elena stepped to the microphone that had been set up near the memorial wall. "Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today not just to honor those whose names are carved in stone, but to celebrate the living legacy they've left us. Their sacrifice gave us the freedom to choose who we want to become. Today, we'll hear from some young people who've chosen to become worthy of that gift." Tom was introduced first, and as he approached the microphone, he felt Tommy Kellerman's presence as clearly as if his old friend were standing beside him. The prepared remarks he'd written the night before seemed inadequate now, so he folded the paper and spoke from his heart. 70 years ago, my best friend Tommy Kellerman died on a beach in France so that young people like Tyler Brooks could grow up free to make their own choices about how to serve their community and their country. Tommy never got to become the teacher he dreamed of being, but today I stand before you as proof that his dream didn't die with him. Tom gestured toward Tyler, who stood at attention near the memorial wall. "This young man attacked me a month ago. He was angry, lost, and channeling his pain into destruction, but instead of simply punishing him, we chose to understand him. We discovered that his anger came from the same place as his father's courage, love for family, and the desire to protect what matters most." The crowd listened in absolute silence as Tom continued. "Tyler's father, Staff Sergeant David Brooks, died saving 4 soldiers in Afghanistan. His grandfather, David Brooks Sr., died serving his country in Korea. His great-grandfather, James Sullivan, died in the Pacific Theater of World War II. 3 generations of sacrifice, and Tyler thought that legacy was nothing but loss and abandonment." Tom paused, looking directly at Tyler. "But legacy isn't about dying for something. It's about living for something. It's about understanding that freedom requires constant protection, and that protection sometimes requires sacrifice, but it always requires service." He stepped back from the microphone, and Tyler took his place. For a moment, the 17-year-old looked overwhelmed by the crowd and the weight of the moment. Then his training kicked in, not military training, but the lessons in dignity and purpose that Tom had taught him over the past month. A month ago, I thought that military service was just another way for good people to get killed for causes that didn't matter, Tyler began, his voice clear and strong. I was angry at my father for choosing duty over family, angry at Mr. Smith for surviving when my dad didn't, angry at a world that seemed to value death more than life. He turned toward the memorial wall where his family's names were carved in granite. But I've learned that service isn't about dying for your country. It's about living for something bigger than yourself. My father didn't die because he cared more about strangers than about my mother and me. He died because he understood that protecting strangers was how he protected us. Tyler's voice grew stronger as he continued. I attacked Mr. Smith because I thought he represented everything that had taken my father away from me. Instead, I discovered that he represented everything my father died to protect: the freedom to make mistakes, the opportunity to learn from them, and the chance to become someone worthy of the sacrifice others made for us. Sarah took the microphone next, her presentation on local military families revealing months of careful research and deep thought. Marcus followed, announcing his decision to enlist in the Marines and his gratitude for mentors who'd helped him understand the difference between serving and fighting. When Maggie Sullivan approached the microphone, the crowd fell silent. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion as she spoke about the challenges of military widowhood, the pride she felt in her husband's service, and her gratitude for a community that had helped her son transform his pain into purpose. 7 years ago, I thought I'd lost both my husband and my son, she said. David died in Afghanistan, and Tyler disappeared into anger and rebellion. Today, I see that David's legacy didn't die with him. It lives in Tyler's commitment to service, in his willingness to mentor other young people who are struggling with loss and anger. She looked directly at her son. Tyler, your father would be proud of the man you're becoming, not because you're wearing his uniform, but because you're living his values. Eleanor announced the program's expansion to 3 neighboring communities, and Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell formally endorsed the mentorship model for national adoption. But the most powerful moment came when several community members who'd initially opposed the program stepped forward to express their support and apologize for their skepticism. As the ceremony concluded, Tom noticed Jake Morrison and his crew slipping away without causing the disruption they'd threatened. Perhaps they'd seen something in Tyler's transformation that challenged their own assumptions about strength and loyalty. The afternoon dissolved into informal conversations, shared stories, and the kind of community bonding that happens when people discover they have more in common than they'd realized. Tom found himself surrounded by young people asking questions about military service, about finding purpose, about honoring family legacies while forging their own paths. As the sun began to set over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the Memorial Plaza, Tom felt a peace he hadn't experienced since Margaret's death. Tommy Kellerman's dream of teaching young people about service and sacrifice had finally been fulfilled, just not in the way either of them had imagined. Tyler approached as Tom was preparing to leave. "What happens now?" the young man asked. Tom smiled, thinking about the cycle of mentorship that was just beginning. "Now you become the teacher, Tyler. You help the next group of angry, lost young people understand what you've learned about turning pain into purpose." As they walked away from the memorial together, Tom thought about the letter Tommy had written to his parents 70 years ago, about building something beautiful with the peace that soldiers had died to protect. Today, they'd laid the foundation for something that would outlast all of them, 6 months after the memorial service, Tom's small apartment had been transformed from a shrine to solitude into something resembling a headquarters for healing. The sparse rooms that had once echoed with loneliness now buzzed with purposeful activity. Tyler's research materials covered the kitchen table, Sarah's college applications were spread across the coffee table, and Marcus's Marine Corps recruitment paperwork was organized in neat piles on Margaret's old reading chair. The morning routine had evolved too. Instead of visiting the memorial alone, Tom now shared the ritual with whoever happened to be available. Today it was Tyler, and a new addition to their growing circle, 17-year-old James Martinez, whose older brother had been killed in a training accident at Camp Pendleton. James carried the same raw anger that Tyler had brought to their first meeting, the same desperate need to blame someone for the unfairness of military service. "I still don't get it," James was saying as they approached Tommy Kellerman's name. On the wall, "Why do you people act like dying for your country is something to celebrate? My brother was going to be an engineer. He was smart, had his whole life planned out. Then one stupid accident, and suddenly everyone wants to call him a hero." Tyler knelt beside Tom, both of them cleaning the granite with practiced efficiency. "That's what I used to think too," Tyler said quietly. "That hero was just a nice word. People used to make senseless death seem meaningful." "Isn't it?" James challenged. Tom paused in his cleaning, considering the question with the same careful attention he'd given Tyler months ago. "James, what was your brother's name?" Roberto Martinez." "And what kind of engineer did he want to be?" "Civil engineer. He wanted to build bridges in poor communities, places where people couldn't afford proper infrastructure." James's voice softened slightly. He used to say that connecting people was the most important work anyone could do. Tyler and Tom exchanged a glance. They'd learned to recognize these moments, when anger began to crack and reveal the love underneath. "Sounds like he was already building bridges," Tyler observed, "just not the kind made of steel and concrete." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Elena appeared, no longer in uniform, but wearing civilian clothes that somehow still carried her military bearing. She'd received her promotion and transfer to the Pentagon, where she was developing the community mentorship program for national implementation. "How's our newest member adjusting?" she asked, nodding toward James. "He's asking the right questions," Tom replied. "Same ones Tyler asked. Same ones I asked for 70 years. Eleanor smiled. "Good. Questions mean he's thinking instead of just feeling." She turned to Tyler. "Speaking of questions, have you made your decision about the military academy?" Tyler's acceptance letter to West Point was folded in his back pocket. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, unable to commit to an answer. The appointment represented everything his father would have wanted for him, but Tyler had learned the difference between living his father's dreams and honoring his father's values. "I'm not going," Tyler said quietly. "At least, not right away." Tom looked up sharply. "Tyler, that's a tremendous opportunity. I know, and maybe I'll apply again in a few years, but right now, there's work to do here. Dr. Hendricks wants me to help coordinate the expanded mentorship program. There are kids like James who need what you gave me, and I'm not ready to walk away from that responsibility." Elena nodded approvingly. "Your father would understand that choice. Service comes in many forms." Sarah appeared from the direction of the community center, her Stanford University sweatshirt bright against the morning fog. She'd come home for Thanksgiving break and had spent every free moment working with the program participants. "How did the interview go?" Tyler asked. "Good, I think. The Family Services Department is interested in having me intern with them next summer. They want someone who understands both academic social work theory and practical community healing." Sarah's smile was radiant. Turns out our little experiment here is getting attention from people who study this stuff professionally. DeMarcus was the last to arrive, and his appearance drew immediate attention. His marine dress blues were crisp and new, his bearing transformed by 3 months of basic training. He was home on leave before deploying to Okinawa, and the change in him was remarkable. "Look at you," Tom said with obvious pride. "Tommy would have loved seeing this." Marcus grinned. "Drill instructor Martinez says I'm a natural leader. Wants me to consider officer candidate school after my first deployment." He paused, his expression growing serious. "I told him I learned leadership from an old Army veteran who taught me that strength without purpose is just bullying." James. Watch these interactions with the careful attention of someone trying to understand a foreign language. "So you all just got better? Your problems just went away?" "No," Tyler replied honestly. "The problems are still there. I still miss my dad. Tom still carries guilt about surviving when his friend didn't. Sarah still struggles with feeling like she has to be perfect to prove she belongs. Marcus still deals with abandonment issues from his parents leaving." "Then what changed?" James asked. Tom stood slowly, his joints protesting but his spirit strong. "We learned to carry our pain differently. Instead of letting it make us smaller, we figured out how to let it make us more useful to other people." He looked around at the young faces surrounding him. Tyler, who'd transformed from destroyer to builder. Sarah, who'd found her calling in healing community wounds. Marcus, who discovered that his need to belong could be channeled into service. And now James, who was just beginning to understand that anger could be shaped into purpose. 6 months ago, I was a lonely old man talking to ghosts, Tom continued. Today, I'm part of something that honors the dead by helping the living. That's not magic. That's just people choosing to see their pain as an opportunity to understand other people's pain. Elena checked her watch. I need to get to the airport, but before I go, James, I want you to think about what Roberta would want you to do with your anger. Tyler can tell you that the answer isn't what you think it is. As Elena departed for her flight back to Washington, the group began their walk to the community center, where a new cohort of troubled teenagers was waiting to begin their own journey toward understanding. Tom thought about the letter Tommy had written 70 years ago about building something beautiful with the peace that soldiers had died to protect. They were building it, one angry young person at a time, one story at a time, one choice at a time. And for the first time since Margaret's death, Tom felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 1 year to the day after Tyler Brooks had pushed him to the ground, Tom Smith stood at the Millbrook Veterans Memorial, watching his former attacker address a crowd of community leaders, military officials, and at-risk youth from 3 counties. The morning fog had lifted early, revealing a perfect California day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Tyler wore a simple polo shirt and khakis. No uniform, no symbols of authority, except the quiet confidence he'd earned through months of hard work. Behind him, the memorial wall gleamed from the daily care he and Tom had given it, each name a story they'd learned together. "A year ago, I attacked Mr. Smith because I thought he represented everything that had taken my father away from me," Tyler was saying, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "I was wrong. He represented everything my father died to protect, the chance to make mistakes, learn from them, and become someone worthy of the sacrifices others made for us." Tom felt Tommy Kellerman's presence as clearly as the morning sun. On his face, his old friend's dream of teaching had finally been realized, just not in a classroom. "Today, I'm officially taking over coordination of the Millbrook Community Mentorship Program," Tyler continued. "Mr. Smith taught me that honor isn't about being perfect. It's about taking responsibility for your failures and using them to help others avoid the same mistakes." In the crowd, Tom spotted familiar faces. James Martinez, no longer carrying the bitter anger that had defined him 6 months ago. Dr. Hendricks, beaming with professional pride. Maggie Sullivan, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son embody everything his father had hoped he might become. Elena Vasquez had flown in from Washington for the ceremony, her Pentagon credentials a testament to how far their small experiment had traveled. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell stood with a delegation of Marine officers who'd come to study the program for national implementation, but it was the newest arrivals that made Tom's heart swell with purpose. A van full of teenagers from San Francisco, referred by juvenile courts and social services, carrying the same anger and pain that Tyler had, brought to their first meeting. The cycle was continuing, expanding, becoming something larger than any of them had imagined. "Mr. Smith," Tyler called from the podium, "would you join me up here?" Tom walked slowly to the front, accepting the microphone with hands that trembled. Slightly. Not from age, but from emotion. "Tommy Kellerman wanted to be a teacher," Tom said simply. "He died before he got the chance. But today, looking at Tyler and the young people this program continues to help, I know Tommy's dream didn't die with him. It just took 70 years to find the right classroom." He handed the microphone back to Tyler and stepped aside, officially passing the torch to the next generation. As applause filled the morning air, Tom closed his eyes and felt Margaret's hand in his, Tommy's laughter in the breeze, and the deep satisfaction of a life finally lived with purpose. The memorial service had become a celebration. The ending had become a beginning, and the cycle of healing would continue, one story at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.